Hello and welcome to another episode of Thick Slices and Deep Cuts. On this evening's episode, I will be discussing and ranking the albums of probably the most difficult band I've ever had to do a show on, and that is Magma from Paris, France. The brainchild of jazz drummer Christian Vander. Quickly to go over this story, and a lot of ground to cover, but basically grew up, had a mom that was like 15 when he was born. I think she was somewhat artistic or a dancer or something like that, but she was not always around, so he was kind of left to his own devices much of his youth. But he was a big fan of John Coltrane out of the jazz world, and I guess when Coltrane died, I believe in '67, that was his calling, that he needed to do something. I think he joined a band and lived in Italy for a little while before he realized he needed to come back home to France and create this music and this mythology. So the big thing, and I'll try and explain as much of it as I can, but the Kobaia mythology and the storyline is pretty tricky. And it's also tricky because it's in its own language, which is a mixture of French and German and a little bit of Latin and a little bit of stuff that they made up. So it's hard to necessarily know all of the storylines, but I'll do my best to give some sort of a slight overview, and hopefully anybody watching probably knows this stuff as well as I, or maybe even better. But we will get right to it because there's a lot to cover. Prog Archives has 14 studio albums, but one of those albums of the 14 is basically the demos of an album. But there is also an album that they have that's only been recorded live. So I'm going to actually rank that album. So in fact, I'll be ranking 14 things, but again, ranking doesn't really matter. And it's tough to rank these albums. It's almost impossible, especially in the middle. You can maybe pick the bottom ones and the very top ones, but everything in the middle, once again, tough to rank. But excited to do this. I've been reviewing these guys for over 2 months. I mean, I've been listening to them for probably, 15 years now, but I really had to just listen to them hardcore for about 2 months, and I learned probably more in the last 2 months than I did in the previous decade and a half, because there's just so much going on. It's very interesting, but we will get right into it. So 14 studio albums, some other stuff too that we'll get to. But their first album came out all the way back in 1970, a classic year for a classic band to start releasing albums. Yeah, I think we need not say another thing about like Black Sabbath. Their first album drops in 70. Bunch of legendary bands around 69, 70. Magma, no exception, although Magma really had nothing to do with the hippie movement or even the prog movement, but for some reason their music appeals to people like me, like prog rockers and metalheads, and they even now play Hellfest in France to a bunch of people. So here we go. We'll just go chronologically, and I'll assign a number to these based on the ranking. But so their first album comes out in 1970. It's either just self-titled or also known as Kobaia. So Kobaia is this planet that these people from Earth is getting bad. Earth is getting violent, militaristic, so a certain amount of Earthlings flee to Kobaia, another planet somewhere else in the galaxy. And apparently, the mythology is not big time here yet. Not a lot of big time storylines, but I believe this is sort of the beginning of the mythology. So they leave for Kobaia. Malaria is apparently a diseased planet that they pass in the galaxy on their way to Kobaia. But beyond that, I don't know much about the storyline here, or if there even is one, or how deep the lyrics are in Kobaia at this point. But the song Kobaia is a classic. There's a song at the end, Stoa, that is weird. So Christian Vander is the drummer and the brainchild behind a lot of this, but he also sings and does weird high-pitched voices. And even in the beginning, you've got their main vocalist for the first half of their career, Klaus Blaskowitz, I believe is his name. So you've got Klaus on vocals and you've got Christian on drums. You've got a myriad of other people here. No female singers yet, but you got like a brass section because 1979 and trying to do the jazz thing. But I have this ranked, let's see, what did I put this? I want to say that I have this at number 8 of 14. That seems low, but it's a classic album. I like this album. It's actually not as difficult to listen to as some of their other albums, which are, I've had people that when I'm listening to Magma, they're almost like, please turn it off. It's bothering me. I don't know if much of this album is bothersome in that way. There are a couple of moments, like I said, on Stoa, but for the most part, this is just a jazzy, cool album for its time. Totally sounds like 1970, but a good production, good drumming, just a good 70s vibe to it. Double album, so this is literally like 81 or 82 minutes long. So they come out swinging with a classic right away. Zeuhl is good, RA is good. Everything on here is pretty good to just classic. I would say more, but we got to keep the train rolling here. But this is a really strong album. I've got it ranked 8 to 14, but it's a classic Magma album, and also Magma, their whole catalog. Maybe with one exception, it's just all good to great. They're just always high quality, always interesting, always just fascinating. The whole band is fascinating. The mythology, Christian Vander, he seems almost crazy, not crazy, but like possessed. And the band seems like a cult. Like, they say a cult band. This band is a cult, it seems like almost. But there you go, their debut, Magma, otherwise known as Kobaia, 1970. Coming in at number 8. Okay, you move ahead 1 year to 1971, another classic year. And they put out another album, I guess somewhat similar to Kobaia. The first 2 albums are kind of, in my opinion, kind of linked as that early stage, because you still got this jazzy band of brass and whatnot. And they put out Magma 2, also known as 1001 Centigrades. And here so Christian Vander writes the sidelong, the 21-minute, 51-second track, Attahk. And then on the second side, you've got about 20 minutes of music written by, which is good. Doesn't sound totally Magma, but it's written by other guys that were in the band at the time, Teddy Lazary and Francois Cahen. So the second side's cool. It's not really as Magma-y as the first side. So Attahk, the big epic, is classic. And this is where the mythology's starting to come in even more. So if I understand correctly, and it's all written here, I just can't decipher it, but Attahk, I believe, was somebody on the planet of Kobaia who wanted to go out and convert the people that hated people from Kobaia and change their way and make everybody. He wanted peace. He thought he could bring peace to the people that had all the hatred. And people on Kobaia kind of advised him, just stay out of that. They're like, it's not your business. Don't mess with those people. But he said, no, I can do this. I can convert people to be our allies, be friends. Well, I don't know exactly what happened, but he died in the process of trying to convert these hateful people. And I don't know what planet he died on, maybe malaria, but it said that they found his body or something in the lake or something like that. So again, if anybody knows this mythology better than I do, please comment on it. But so the Kobaian mythology is now moving forward with the story of Attahk. So in the first album, they've left Earth, they've passed some crazy places, but they've made their home on Kobaia. And Attahk wanted to be a hero, didn't quite work out. Another classic album. It's classic album. It's classic Magma, but it's not as classic as other classic Magma, I suppose. So I have this coming in at number 9 out of 14. But if you have 14 albums and this is your 9th best album and it's classic, you have quite the legacy. So there you go, coming in at number 9, their second album from 71, Magma 2 or 1001 Centigrades. Okay, so moving forward, A lot of songwriting during this time, 72, but no album came out in 72. And a lot of the guys from this early incarnation of Magma on the first two albums, they left and formed a band called Zao, Z-A-O. Oh, by the way, this is all called, Magma invented the scene called Zeuhl, Z-E-U-H-L, celestial music. So Zao, so these guys break away from Christian and Magma, and they create their own music, which I guess side 2 of 1001 Centigrades is a good reference to Zao, but they tried to do their own version of Zeuhl. I've heard like probably 5 minutes of it, maybe 10. It's okay. It doesn't catch your attention like Magma does though. So, but those guys left. Christian retools the band. He comes back, now he's got a completely different band, and get ready, 1973, I did a video at the beginning of this channel about how great 1973 was. 1973, MDK, Mëkanïk Dëstruktöwïdëkmandö. And this is part of a trilogy that we'll talk about in the mythology, this Kobaia mythology. But here you've got Attahk on bass. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, because he's their best bass player they've ever had. Attahk. Klaus is still on vocals, Christian on drums. But now you've got Stella Vander and other people doing vocals. So you've got Stella, who I believe married Christian Vander. I think they were married, had a daughter and all that stuff. But she's in the band here. You know, they're like an 8, 9, 10 piece, probably a 9 piece at this point if I had to guess. But they've got all kinds of people in the band at this point. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I count 7. There might be 8. But so anyway, MDK, as it's known, comes out, third album, new lineup, definite shift for the better into just even more class. This is as classic of Magma as you're going to get as we enter 73 here. This is part of the Attahk trilogy, and it's actually the first thing to come out, but it's the third of 3 parts in the trilogy, if you can follow that. And I believe this is just the part where Kobaia and Earth are just completely, I guess they're enemies. They just want nothing to do with each other after some battling to try and convert Earth to the way Kobaia is, or to see if people want to come to Kobaia, or whatever the case is. This is the end of this Attahk trilogy, and at this point, you know, I think Earth said Kobaia is dead to them, or vice versa. The song we may hear later, Mëkanïk Dëstruktöwïdëkmandö, I love it. There are some great live versions of this that I'll get to on the Retrospektïw. But this is also the ultimate version, because Mëkanïk Dëstruktöwïdëkmandö on here cannot be beat, it seems. And this is just classic all the way through. Even though it's got dark imagery, it is a way busier album. Lots of energy. It's dark in spots, but it's not as dark as you would think, but it's got that good energy. It's busy, and it's just the true Magma with Stella Vander and great bass playing has arrived. And so this is the #1 album. And I think that's the consensus pick, is this is the epitome of Magma. If you want to know what they're really all about and you don't know anything, you could start here and get a pretty good idea of what they're capable of. They still have the horns, a little bit of the brass here and there, which they do throughout their career, but this would be maybe the end of that for at least a little bit. But this is the classic album, MDK, Mëkanïk Dëstruktöwïdëkmandö. Their third album from 73, coming in at #1. Okay. Oh, that's because it's right here. Okay, so next, this is confusing too. So this is the second part of the Attahk trilogy, but it came out, and it did come out second. So the third part came out first, the second part came out second, and it's called Wurdah Itah, or Wurdah Itah, or Dead Earth, or Earth is Dead, which I think is basically what Kobaia's sentiment towards Earth at this point. Wurdah Itah. This was actually released as a soundtrack for some movie called Tristan and Isolde, and it was released under Christian Vander's name for the longest time. and it only had Christian on drums and piano, Yannick Top on bass, and Klaus Blasquez on vocals, and also Stella Vander on vocals. But it's the most stripped down version of Magma I think you'll ever hear. Just very stripped down to the bare bones. And that's why I have this one, even though it's classic, I have it ranked 7th and not higher. I like the album. It's just a little stripped down. I like them when they have a little bit more color, or just a little bit more going on. But there's plenty going on here for who's playing. And we might hear the last 2 tracks if we go long enough on here. And I cannot pronounce these, but I will say this. Malawelcome, the lead-off track, is also great. It's the same name as the lead-off track for the first part of this trilogy. And while this is my favorite track on the album, the version on the part 1 of this trilogy is even better at executing this track. So I think this is a classic album. I guess I reached for it a little bit less. That's why it's coming in at 7. But man, in terms of like classic albums, this is right in the heart of it. Right in the heart of it. 1974, part of the Two's Hhaï trilogy, part 2 of that. But their 4th album coming from 1974, coming in at number 7. Music from MDK there. And then I guess they recorded this, if I read this correctly, they went into the studio and recorded this like a month after Wurdah Itah, but again in 74, their 5th album, Köhntarkösz. And this, I don't think anybody knew it at the time, but this is part of a different trilogy. So you've got trilogies going on with albums not yet released. They're out of sequence. One's a soundtrack to a movie with just Christian's name on it. And then right after that, they go in the studio with Yannick Top, Klaus, Christian, Stella. Who else is on this one? Not exactly anybody super notable, but they do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people listed on this. This one's my number 2, because this is also classic. It's my favorite of another trilogy. So my number 1 is my favorite of that trilogy, and then a year later, this trilogy's going on, and you're just in the heart of classic Magma right here. This one's different from MDK in that it's a lot, I guess it's slower. I mean, it's not totally slow. And it's got Köhntarkösz Part 1, Köhntarkösz Part 2. Yannick Top wrote Orc Alarm. The word orc is going to be part of the mythology here coming up. And then Coltrane's Sundia. But for the most part, most of this album is about 32 or 33 minutes of the Köhntarkösz pieces. From what I can tell, Köhntarkösz was the middle part of the trilogy. The Köhntarkösz trilogy, and it's called Köhntarkösz, I believe, and this was a person. I believe this is the middle piece of the trilogy. So Köhntarkösz was, I assume, this earthling, and this might be where the Egyptian mythology gets in, and he wanted to go into the tomb to see this old clairvoyant, soothsayer, whatever, this guy named Amentet-Re. I might be pronouncing that wrong. So this is about him, I guess, being in the tomb with the tomb, in the room with the tomb. But I don't know much of the details other than Köhntarkösz is in the room with the tomb of Amentet-Re. I guess the first part is him going through the catacombs, but in this album, that's where he is. I don't know the details, but awesome album. Not doomy, but just dark in tone, heavy. I can see why metalheads really enjoy Magma. But anyway, to keep it moving, we're going with Köhntarkösz, their 5th album from 74, coming in at number 2. Okay. Magma Live, or Hhaï, H-H-A-I, sometimes known as Köhntark. So it's either Live, Hhaï, or Köhntark. Came out in 75. I'm not ranking it, but if I did, this might be my number 1. I love this live album. It's heavy on Köhntarkösz. It's got Köhntark Part 1 and Köhntark Part 2. And the reason the names are slightly different is because these pieces evolve over time. And so even a year or less later playing this live, the songs have already changed a little bit. You can tell it's Köhntarkösz Part 1 and Part 2, but now it's called Köhntark Part 1 and Part 2 because they've evolved just a little bit more, and they're awesome. And it's just a slightly different version of what we already know. And then there's a huge chunk of Mëkanïk Dëstruktöwïdëkmandö on here. At the end, you've got Da Zeuhl Words Mëkanïk, and then this Mëkanïk Zane, which is just combining some parts of it. So it's basically taken about 25 plus minutes of MDK and putting it on here. It's a track called Lens, which you can't find anywhere else, or you can't find it on a studio album, let's put it that way. Kobaia is a new version of Kobaia. It's a lot groovier. Hhaï, Hhaï is on here, and Ÿliköhnöss Announcement are on here. So right there you've got about almost 17 minutes of music that would be for a forthcoming album. But it's on here, so you got a chunk of Ÿliköhnöss stuff for a forthcoming album. You've got a huge chunk of Köhntarkösz, but it's evolved. And then you've got an evolved chunk of Mëkanïk Zane and a cool, groovier version of Kobaia called Kobaia, and a new track called Lens. So what an awesome album. And also, live here, Yannick Top is not on bass, but man, Bernard Paganati is awesome on bass. You don't miss a beat when Yannick's gone. When Bernard is playing bass or Yannick, it's all good. Also, Didier Lockwood is playing violin on here. I love it when he plays for them, basically just in some live situations. But this is maybe a great place to start. It's a lot easier to get into the band here too. But live from 75 is classic, and that's just what I just talked about here is like classic Magma, all this stuff. And then you move ahead to 76. I still consider this classic, but definitely it's changing. You're not in any of those trilogies anymore, but you're in 76. You got Üdu Üòdu or Üdu Üòdu. Again, I don't know the mythology on this one as well, but this is part of what they call the Orc trilogy, although it's really not a 3-album set. It's really just like an Orc 2-parter. But again, you've got the title track, which right as it starts and you hear these like bongos and some horns, and you're like, wow, this is completely different from what they've been doing. This almost sounds like something from the first 2 albums for a split second. And it is a little goofy, and the direction on here is not as awesome as these earlier directions. There he is. There's Christian Vander looking crazy, and there's Yannick Top. I don't know why they have just 2 people in the band photo, but that's Magma for you. I don't know what to say. This is my guilty pleasure album. I'm supposed to not like it, and the direction's a little goofy at times, but man, the title track is kind of catchy. V-Dorge is the second one, with Bernard Paganati playing bass on that one. That song is, I love that song. In fact, after this album, he and some other people on this album, different lineup a little bit, they formed a band called V-Dorge and did some Zeuhl type stuff. But the big thing too is Zombies. I love that song. It's very dark and experimental and creative and cool and catchy. And then De Futura is the big, it's as close to prog rock as they're gonna get. It's this big like 16, what's the official time on that track? But it's one of those nearly side-long tracks. 17:37. It feels like they're, Yannick Top wrote it apparently, but it just feels like they're attempted like that prog rock thing with the epic, lots of, even if there aren't a ton of guitars in it, the bass is just going nuts. It's still, even when they don't have guitars, they don't need them. The bass player is usually very aggressive and busy, so. But it's just a guilty pleasure album of mine. I've got it at number 5. Number 5, yeah, they're changing directions. They're into a new era here, and I think a lot of people would say the classic era kind of ended after this. I would extend it just a little bit further for this new flavor here of Magma, which may be in ways a little more accessible at times. But again, love it. We'll keep moving here. Anyway, this is their, from 1976, this is, I believe, their 6th album, coming in at number 5. And then to finish out the 70s, they come back with an album, I guess, kind of connected to this, although this is kind of its own thing, and this is kind of its own thing. Artwork by H.R. Giger. Bizarre album cover of Orgo and Gorgon. Called Attahk. Completely different lineup at this point. I don't even know who's playing bass, but it's not Yannick or Bernard. And this one I have all the way down at 12. I just, the last 7 minutes is good, and yet for some reason I'm irritated by it, like the production. But it's good. It's a little more mainstreamy at times. Rinda is a great song, but it's done even better on the forthcoming MN Tet Ray album. So this MN Tet Ray album has got sprinkles of its work all throughout, like Üdu Üòdu and Live and Attahk. Lyric Necronomicus Kant. I don't know if we've heard it yet, but we'll hear a snippet of that. And then it ends with, Mont, Donde, and Nono. I don't know. It just doesn't do a lot for me. I usually listen to the last 7 minutes in Lyric Necronomicus Kant, and the Rinda is good, but I listen to that on the other album. And then Tetere, there it is. But so that's why I'm ranking this 12th. It's not, and again, it's a good album. It's just in comparison to what came before it, I feel like this is my least favorite album up to this point. And it's 78, but it's still has good moments. Even these albums that I'm kind of down on a little bit, they're still good, and they still have classic stuff on them. So there you go. Their last album of the 70s, coming in at number 12, Attahk. And then real quick, I do have to pause, but before I do that, this thing, Retrospektïw 1, 2, and 3. So these came out in 81 from a concert or concerts done in 1980. You got Didier Lockwood on violins again. You got Bernard Paganotti back in the house on bass, and you've got two like keyboard players, like synth players. So you got like keyboard synths, 2 of those guys, and a violin player. And so instead of any brass or any of that stuff, you're filling out the band with that, and then all the female vocalists. I love that setup for the band. But Tu's Hamtak, I know there's like an earlier version of it from like 74 BBC or something, but Tu's Hamtak, recorded here in 1980, is so awesome, and I'm ranking that as an album, even though there's not a studio version, and that's my number 3 album. I love Tu's Hamtak. It's kind of like Köhntarkösz, maybe a little busier, but it's like that, and it's moody, it's kind of quiet, but you can feel tension under the surface, and sometimes it rises up. In fact, it rises up a few times. And that's just a great piece. That's my number 3. I know it's not a proper album. I don't care. Tu's Hamtak. It's the first part of the Tu's Hamtak trilogy, written back in the day. Early recordings of it around 74. Tu's Hamtak trilogy. The first part came out last, so that they literally released the 3rd part first, the 2nd part second, and the 1st part is found here. Then you've got a full version of Mëkanïk Dëstruktöwïdëkmandö, which is an excellent version. My other favorite live version of that. And then at the end, you've got a song called Retrovision, which was apparently written during the Attahk era. It's okay. Another version of Hhaï, and then a song called Le De Watson, don't know. And then a bonus Retrovision on there. So, but this is awesome. Really well recorded. And so even though this is not the 70s and these recordings were in 80, to me this almost wraps up the first half of the band. But I have 12 of these albums. There are 2 I don't have. And before we wrap up, I'll just say this about Merci, which came out in 85, 84. I heard that the band broke up in 83. I saw that this album started to be recorded as early as 82 through 84. I saw that it was released in 84, but I actually think it was released in 85, and it doesn't sound anything like Magma. It sounds like just bad early 80s with the Simmons kit drums and all that. It's not bad, it's just, it has almost nothing to do with Magma. And I listened to it, I think, twice in the last 2 months, and It's not, okay, I will just say it's not bad for what it is, but compared to all of this stuff, I would say that it's just not going to keep your attention. But that would close out the first half of Magma, as Christian would shut it down and go do this project called Offering for a while before the band would get back together. But with that note, we're going to pause real quick, and we'll come right back. Okay, and we're back. Let's see, where we left off was basically they put out this weird album, Merci. It sounded like the band was already well broken up by the time this was even released, and Christian was on to other things for a while. Then I want to say 96, they got back together sometime in the mid-90s, and they released like 8 minutes of stuff around 98. They got a new guitar player named James McGaw. Antoine Paganotti, I don't know if he's a brother or a son of Bernard Paganotti, their former bass player, but he's now their main vocalist. Isabel, the vocalist, she's back. Stella Vander is definitely back. They have a few other people. Oh, Philippe Buissonnet is their bass player. So they have a pretty different lineup, but you've got Christian and Stella coming back for sure. And this is the first thing I ever got from them. But in 01, it's the Attahk trilogy done live. And this was my introduction to the band. And Attahk I liked back then. Wurdah Itah I liked here because it's like a 10-piece band instead of that stripped down 4-piece band. So it's a little bit more on this recording. And so this was a really cool way to come back. With the release of this, I think it got people excited for Magma once again. And plus, I mean, I'm sure people were aware of Attahk, especially if you were aware of that Retrospektïw album that came out. But if you weren't, or couldn't find it at that point in time, because this is 2001, you get Attahk right here. And Wurdah Itah, I think that was still listed under Christian Vander's name. So to have Wurdah Itah with a full band this time, under the Magma logo, along with Attahk, this was a really cool thing. So not ranking it, but definitely notable. I think that covers it for the live stuff I have, but you're talking 75, you're talking 80, and then you're talking the reunion 01. And then you get on to 2004, and boom, they release a new studio album called K.A. or Köhntarkösz Anteria, which I believe is the first part of the trilogy. And I thought I read somewhere where somebody said the story of Köhntarkösz and Ÿliköhnöss is actually like a fable, and it actually happened before anybody left Earth for Kobaia. So in a way, maybe this is the earliest mythology. But apparently this is, there's the tomb, and I guess this is where Köhntarkösz enters the catacomb of the tomb of Ÿliköhnöss. I have this one ranked 6th. I really enjoy this. We heard KA Part 3 earlier, very jammy. This is a good place to start if you're new to the band, because it's pretty smooth sounding. If you don't like all the harsh, angular parts of Magma and all the chanting, you probably would like this a little bit better. It's it's a good listen, and it jams on Part 3 and it jams throughout. Trying to pick up the pace here, but this is definitely a classic album. I've got it ranked 6th. Man, but all the albums ahead of it are just incredible. Like I said, I think they have 9 classic albums of the 14. So if any of these are ranked 1 through 9, to me, that's where you want to be. And that's not even counting these, these couple of live albums too. But Köhntarkösz Anteria, excellent comeback, and it was like reestablishing the brand too in a way. You're like, and also some of this material was found in an early version on something called In Edits that was released in 77 from some stuff in like even earlier, like 73, 74. I think they wrote almost everything between like 72, 73, 74, 75. It seemed like they wrote everything then. So they revived some old recordings and they reestablished the brand, and I think all Magma fans, I wasn't aware in '04 when this came out, but I think Magma fans were ecstatic about this release when it came out. So there you go. Their comeback album to reestablish Magma in '04, Ka, otherwise known as Köhntarkösz Anteria, coming in at number 6. All right, we've talked about this album a lot. You move ahead to '09, you've got Centigrades. Now you've got Herb Ackman as your lead vocalist, but you still got a lot of the same people in key positions. And if you listen to Centigrades, especially parts 1 and 2, you hear a lot of familiar melodies and pieces because you heard them on a huge chunk of it on the live album from '75, a little bit of it from the Üdu Üòdu album from '76, and some of it definitely from the Attahk album from '78 is all on here. But this is my number 5. This is like the epitome of Magma. This is like the essence of what they are, and this is the third part of the Köhntarkösz trilogy. So it started with Ka, but Ka was the first part released second, and Köhntarkösz was the second part released first. But this was at least released, the third part released third. Just classic. It's got that I don't know if angst. It's got that urgency. It's got that good urgency. It's moody. It's dark. It's melodic. It's got a lot of that tension and release stuff that I like. Just one of their classic albums, and these first 2 albums that they released when they kind of reformed, taking that old material and working it into something now, I think that was the way to go. So even though this album was released in '09, I still feel like up to this point in their career, minus Merci, everything is just classic Magma still up to this point. So for purposes of keeping it moving, this is a classic. It's a number 5. It's part of the Köhntarkösz trilogy. Also, the Two's Attahk trilogy is great. My top 7 albums are those trilogies, and I snuck Üdu Üòdu in there as sort of my guilty pleasure pick. And then the first 2 albums were 8 and 9, but those are classic. And so that's how I came to the classic albums are all of those. Those trilogies, the first 2, and then I threw in Üdu Üòdu. That's, for me, that's classic Magma. But there you go. Coming in at number 5 from 2009, but really written back in the '70s. Centigrades. All right, here we go. So you move ahead to 2012. You've got new material. ÿliköhnöss. It's only 32 minutes, but it's considered a full length, and it is. And the song ÿliköhnöss, or that part, is only 28 minutes. They got a little 4-minute thing at the end. I like this. I've got it ranked 10. Doesn't mean I don't. It's not going to be as classic as the classic stuff. I mean, it was released in 2012. But is it good? Yeah, it's good, and it's almost joyous in spots. The opening part, Ekma, is really cool, and it's got that good tension. But really, outside of that, it's all pretty joyous. It goes from that tense first part, and then it goes immediately into part 2, flows into part 2, which is all joyous. Part 3 is cool. It almost sounds like Japanese. There's a part in there that's just piano the whole way. I think we heard a part earlier. But there you go. ÿliköhnöss I got coming in at number 10. I'm going to keep it moving here. Here we go. Kobaia, but this is the Koba version from live. Then you move ahead 2 years after that, pretty much the same lineup as ÿliköhnöss, and it's a re-recording of Attahk. It's pretty true to the original version, with the exception of the instrumentation is a little bit different, a little bit more modern, and there's a cool, nice little pleasant outro, like a minute long, called Voler at the end. But what can I say? This is a really cool recording, re-recording of Attahk. I think this version is classic, and this version is great. So I just think it's cool that you've got 2 good versions of the song, one from '71 and one in the modern day. I'm not going to rank it. It's an EP and it's a re-recording, but still very cool. Not going to rank this either because it's a 20-minute or so EP, but in 2015, same lineup. I don't know if you can see it, but Slag Tanz, their heaviest, darkest thing ever, and I really enjoy it. And they have a nasty, I guess it's a melody, it's a dark melody, this dissonant melody, and throughout every part of the song, minus the outro part, which is completely even bleaker and darker, they can't quite get away from that dark theme. So even when you think they're like, oh, the skies are clearing, it's not going to be as black. And then you think it's going to get more pleasant, and then they somehow get right back into the dark riff. I love this album. I mean, I'm sure it's not for everybody, I know that, but Slag Tanz, again, an EP, not going to rank it, but man, awesome. And we'll probably hear it here in a little bit. Let's see. Oh yeah, so here we go. Back to another album, 2019, Zëss. Le Jour du Néant. Apparently that means the day of nothing, but Zëss. So this, you can find early recordings of this in 81 and I think somewhere in 79. So this is another one kind of written in the 70s and back in the day, much like K.A. and Centigrades. But this one, we heard the introduction to this to open the show, and I love the introduction, and they're with the Prague Philharmonic Orchestra, and Christian comes out front to just do vocals. So Morgan Ogren of Casualties of Cool and Devin Townsend and other things, he's the drummer on here. And the first track is great, and the last track is really great. But there are 5 tracks in the middle that total about 28 minutes, and they just do the same damn rhythm and the same thing for like 28 minutes nonstop. And that's why this is going to be my number 11. It would have been a great album had they varied it in the middle 28 minutes to be more than just the same damn thing the whole way. But it's still a cool album, and it's basically the end of the Kobaia mythology. To me, it feels like the grand finale. It's like wrapping it all up. Like either they all found peace in the galaxy or everything's just going to be obliterated. And they've just come to that conclusion. I don't know. It's one or the other, but it just feels like this is the grand finale. If you played the Kobaian mythology from beginning to end story-wise, this would be your last track. It would be this big 37-minute grand finale. So I guess if you think about that 28-minute part that just never lets up, maybe it's just like, hey, Magma, the Kobaian mythology deserves a grand ending, but man, it really tests you to try and get through it. But Zëss, still a cool album. Cool that they recorded with an orchestra. Cool that Morgan Ogren jumps in on drums while Christian goes out front to sing. But it is coming in at 11. It's just not as classic as some of the other stuff, but still cool. A worthy addition to the catalog. And so there you go, Zëss at number 11. And then last but not least, they released this less than a year ago, October of 22, called Cartel. I don't own it. It's the other 2 albums I don't own are Merci and Cartel. It's okay. The songs that start with the letter W, tracks 4 and 5, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, those are pretty good. Apparently the first and last tracks, the bonus tracks on the disc are from 78. And so the first and last tracks, you hear the demo versions of those. So again, more music kind of drummed up from back in the day. And it's okay. It doesn't do a lot for me. It certainly doesn't feel classic to me, but it's coming in at number 13. So Merci at 14 and Cartel at 13. Merci definitely at the bottom, but Cartel just mainly, it's not classic and I'm not as familiar with it. Plus it doesn't have their classic logo on it either, for whatever that's worth. But it didn't sound bad. I'm glad they're still putting out music. So Slag Tanz, or just the Slag is this one. So that is ranking the albums of Magma. They also have these like Myths and Legends videos. They got 5 of those. An Ementet Ray trilogy video. I think it was about the last thing that James McGaw recorded with them before he unfortunately passed away in 2018. But he was with the band for a long time as their guitar player. But real quick, to go through it again, I don't know if I can pull this off, but if I can, I will. So again, in order, their debut album, Kobaia, coming in at number 8. 1001 Centigrades, their second album, coming in at number 9. Kind of close out that early era. And then MDK, Mëkanïk Dëstruktöwïdëkmandö, their classic from 73, coming in at 1. What was number... Oh. Boy, I'm all lost with my albums here. And then Wurdah Itah from 74, coming in at number 7. And then a month later, recorded anyway, Köhntarkösz from 74, coming in at number 2. And then Üdu Üòdu, my guilty pleasure pick, coming in at 5. Attahk from 78, coming in at number 12. Merci, coming in at dead last at 14. That was their 80s album. Then they reformed their comeback album K.A. at number 6. Centigrades from 09 at number 4. Then Ÿliköhnöss from 2012, coming in at 10. And then I guess you'd go to Zëss from 2019, coming in at 11. And Cartel coming in at 13. And then once again, these live albums are just mandatory for Attahk especially, and a great recording of Mëkanïk Dëstruktöwïdëkmandö. But live Hhaï, you just got Köhntarkösz, you got stuff from Centigrades, MDK's on here, Kobaia, groovy version, Didier Lockwood, and the cool keyboards and stuff on these live albums. Their real comeback here with Wurdah Itah, fleshed out, Attahk, MDK, nice re-recording. This is dark, Slag Tanz. If you want to hear the darkest Magma, that's a good place to go with that. But on this creepy note, I will see you next time.